Earlier today, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy called on Speaker Nancy Pelosi to halt the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Pelosi has rejected that suggestion. Mr. Trump responded by saying he looks forward to McCarthy, quote, soon becoming Speaker of the House. Lanhee Chen is a Republican strategist and former policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. He's also a fellow at the Hoover Institute. Lanhee, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tanya.
There is a new report in The Hill saying, and I quote, House Republicans are expressing frustration with how the White House is handling the Democratic charge on impeachment. So what are you hearing from Republicans behind the scenes about this?
Well, I think there are very real repercussions, Tanya, for House Republicans in looking at how this impeachment proceeding is handled. And I think the primary concern amongst Republicans is that there will be spillover potentially if it's handled poorly. So I don't think it's so much concern about the president. It's concern that there isn't an apparatus set up at the White House to respond necessarily in a way that would be beneficial to Republicans going forward. So as is typical in politics, the concern is about the political fortunes of those members individually rather than the fortunes of the president per se.
Right. We have heard that, Republicans are saying there's no consistent messaging that's useful coming out of the White House that everybody is sort of staying on the same narrative with. Have you seen some messaging Republicans have been using on impeachment that you think is working?
Well, the challenge is the president himself has some messaging that he's using on Twitter and in other places, and so he's the one largely driving this. And his message is that this whole thing is a hoax. And I think for Republicans on Capitol Hill, that's a much more difficult message to carry through. The president might be able to get away with it. The president might be able to articulate that message. But for them, they're going to get questions in their districts. They're going to get questions from the media. And I think they may be less well equipped. So I think the frustration is around maybe not having a singular message that anybody but the president can carry forward to voters and to the general public.
Now, Lanhee, on Wednesday, President Trump said House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is, quote, incapable of working on lowering prescription drug prices or the USMCA, all because of the impeachment inquiry. But from what we've seen so far, does it appear the White House is also on board with all of this and capable of working with other things while the impeachment inquiry is going on?
I actually think the White House would love to make progress on substantive things. I think they would love to move forward on prescription drug pricing, USMCA. They're both priorities. I do think there is a challenge here, though, which is can they compartmentalize that activity with Democrats on Capitol Hill while all of this is going on, while the president is expressing frustration, and while, frankly, he's very unhappy with Democrats on Capitol Hill. But I think at the staff level, there is an interest in trying to move forward on all of these policy priorities, both for Republicans and Democrats. I've heard Democrats are also quite keen to move ahead at some point. So once this impeachment proceeding finishes, when we get to early 2020, clearly there is some possibility we might see policy progress on the areas you've mentioned.
So are you saying that right now the spirit of cooperation isn't high there on the Hill?
The spirit of cooperation is not high, but certainly the intention behind both sides trying to get together is quite present.
Right. Okay. So you worked, of course, on Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. He is now in the Senate. He said the transcript of President Trump's call with Ukraine's president was, quote, deeply troubling. He was one of the few Republicans to come out with any sort of criticism. So what kinds of risks do Republicans face by saying something critical about the president's Ukraine call?
I think there are a few principal risks to be aware of. One is obviously the president's reaction, potentially, lashing out on Twitter, speaking out against any Republican who would have any kind of messaging that deviates from anything but full support for the president. The president has a huge megaphone in Twitter. He has a huge ability to influence people who are in the Republican base, those voters who Republicans need to win re-election or to win an election in 2020. And so I think that's really the big issue. What are the electoral repercussions of speaking out against the president? And that's why more Republicans, I think, have been concerned about speaking out, about being forthright at expressing concern they might have about everything that's going on in the current incident.
Right. All right. Quickly, because we don't have a lot of time, obviously the president has been using his messaging around the impeachment inquiry to raise quite a war chest going into 2020. He's been able to use it quite successfully from a fundraising perspective. Do you think that it will be as successful as a general strategy, looking beyond his base, looking to whether it will bring in those voters who he will need to be reelected but are not part of the solid base?
I think that's the big question, which is, can he reach those voters who are persuadable? Some voters who maybe even said, we'll give him a shot in 2016, but aren't solid Republicans. Speaking out to and captivating that part of the electorate is going to be crucial, I think, for the president to win re-election in 2020.
All right. Well, Lanhee Chen, we thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.